Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Saturday morning D&D show. My name is Jordan with a silent PH in the middle, and I'm joined today by our good friend Lex from Dank Dungeons and the internet's Lex, as I like to call him, because he's just all over the internet. And he's going to be my special guest host today because Lucian bailed on me last minute. So Lex is awesome for being here. Also last minute. So welcome. Thank you.
Hey, no, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'm excited to be on an episode that isn't accidentally deleted. Really good. I
believe that was way
time on the show.
We're on episode 129, and I think that was episode like 5 or 6 that I'm like, Lex, be on the show with me, and then I didn't record it, and we only streamed it, but that was before I understood Twitch, and you have to activate something to have it archive, even for like a week. So
yeah,
like,
it doesn't automatically do that. Yep.
So the video was just gone. So but we talked about a lot of good stuff that episode, I'm sure, because we're very interesting people. And,
it was great.
Yeah,
it was an amazing episode.
So
lost to the sands of time. But I didn't realize you were this far in. Even though I was looking at the show notes, which indicated the episode number, it still really hit me when you said it just now. I'm like, wow, you've been doing such a great job with this show.
Well,
so consistent.
Fairly consistent. My dog's barking for some reason. There's certain weeks that we don't do a show for whatever reason. But lately we've been trying to get guest hosts. So when only Jordan can't make it, Lucian will find somebody else to be on the show and stuff, and vice versa. But no, it's been fun. And it's like I don't know, I have so many things going on with YouTube and Rod of Seven Parts and my personal life and stuff. But this has been a nice like end of the week capstone, I guess. Like I finish Friday and we do the show, and it just gets me amped up to work on stuff over the weekend. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Nice.
Lex, who are you for people who don't know?
Oh gosh. I'm the internet's Lex Mandrick.
Yes.
You can find me on the internet, on Twitter at Dank Dungeons, and I do all sorts of different stuff. I write stuff. Sometimes I make music. I have an actual play fantasy comedy series on YouTube, and gosh, what else do I do? I don't know. Those are the main things.
Yeah. No, and you've written, you've collaborated with a mutual friend of ours. Well, you introduced me to our mutual friend, but and you did The Joy of Monster Cooking and some various other things on the DMsGuild, which are very funny. I believe WebDM talked about it randomly one day, and so I was like,
they did. Well, they did a video on like eating monsters and stuff. And the idea of like harvesting stuff from monsters and using their parts. Hey, LB is in chat. Very cool. And in that video, they were talking about like, oh, if you need a book on cooking monsters, just pick up The Joy of Monster Cooking. And then we got a lot of sales.
Yeah, that's fun.
So that was cool. But we're really happy with how that book came out. At this point, it was like, gosh, 2 years ago. It was a while ago we wrote it. But the things that still stick out to me is that every once in a while we will still get notes from people being like, oh, I like printed out like a physical copy of this so that when my players are in the game world and they find the book in the game world, I can give it to them and then they can like choose to try and use it to make recipes. That I always get a kick out of that.
No, that's really fun. I love props, I guess I should say that. And so one of my favorite setting things, and I think you probably enjoy or know about it and enjoy it, is Hot Springs Island. And with Hot Springs Island, there is another supplement book called A Field Guide to Hot Springs Island. And when they find the field guide in the game, you physically hand them that book. And you're like, oh, here you go. And it's got notes in it from previous explorers. And so my players, when they finally got the book, they were like, what the heck? Because there were hexes that were like mapped out that they hadn't been to yet. And so it was this really cool, oh, did you guys know there's like a dragon statue over here? And like, it was really fun. But even like going to a pub or a tavern and having physical menus to hand to them, like I always think that's a lot of fun.
100%. Yeah.
One of my favorite games one of my games that I haven't played yet is Invisible Sun that I really love. And they have a mechanic where it rains keys, like physical keys in the world. And every once in a while, you'll find a magical one called a wicked key that can unlock certain things. And it's taken a lot of willpower to not purchase these physical metal keys that Monte Cook Games is producing and putting on their website for a game that I'm not even actively playing, to then have props that I will probably never use in the game. But like, yeah, it's kind of fun.
I like the idea of being like, it's raining keys now, and you just take a box out from under the table and start throwing keys at people, at your players.
That's exactly what you need to do. It's amazing like that.
Find shelter. Metal is falling on your head.
It's awful. It's crazy. That's I think you would like Invisible Sun if you've ever checked it out. The world is very odd, and I like it a lot.
I've looked at like a little bit of stuff. It's so out there that it's really difficult for me to like try and get into it. Like I'm sure that I would love to play in a game of it if someone was like, oh, play in this one shot, because then someone would be able to introduce me to it and like ease me into it. But whenever I've tried to read stuff about it, I'm like overwhelmed, too much weirdness one time.
Yeah, I got overwhelmed with it as well, but then I don't know, I just went headfirst into it. And there was like, I think there was like a month and a half, maybe like 5 weeks, where I was just actively reading all of the Invisible Sun books that I bought and PDFs and things. And of course, the more you read, the more things connect together, and you kind of realize like, oh, there's like a overarching design that Monte Cook did when he was building this world. But that's the joy of playing in it, is that you as the player start to unravel and you're like, oh, it is all connected. It's kind of cool. And anyway, but a game that I have not been able to play. People from the show might remember, Lex, you are on Rod of Seven Parts with us.
That's true.
I play and you play Shifter,
the illusionist wizard, who's a huge jerk. Shifter is such a jerk, just so mean to everyone.
He's very in control, I think is a good word to say. And because of that, it's like, no, you do this for me. Like, or no, we do this. Like, this is the most logical decision to maintain order and control and what have you. I know you're on the spot here, but I mean, I assume you're having fun with it. Is it?
Oh no, the game's terrible. I don't know who runs it, but they do an awful job. They're really bad. Worst. No, it's a cool game. It's a really great conversion from second edition. I think you've done a good job with it, and I appreciate it because there are a lot of things that come up, especially when we roll on tables and stuff, where I'm like, ooh, this feels like second edition. Yeah. In a good way, because we're not like calculating THAC0. Like that would be second edition in a bad way.
Yeah, right? Yeah. No, and I guess that's the point, as I love a lot of these older adventures, and I read a lot of them for the lore aspect, and it's so easy to like just, I was going to say upgrade, but not a lot of people would think that it's an upgrade from second edition, but that story's still good, and you can take it and just kind of plot it and be like, let's run it. And Rod of Seven Parts is unique because it says in the beginning of the book, like, the rods just exist in the world, these fragments, or in the universe, and wherever they land, that's when the story starts happening. So you could just be like, I'm going to put it in Eberron, or I'm going to put it here, and it's kind of like, you could put it wherever you want, and I chose Faerun because of the channel and stuff. And I like the Forgotten Realms, and you like the Realms because you knew quite a bit going in. You created your character from
I think there's all sorts of parts of the Realms that I look into on a regular basis just because I think they're interesting. A lot of people find the Realms to be very generic fantasy, but I typically discover that when I drill down into like asking those people what they think is so generic about it, they just cite examples from the Sword Coast, and I'm just like, well, you're right, the Sword Coast is really generic fantasy, or high fantasy I should say, but like there's a lot more to the continent than that, and there's a lot of really varied stories you can tell because there are very varied locations. There's like a great Egypt analog, a great Persia analog, there's a great Turkey analog, there's I later in the show I wanted to talk about Narfel a little bit, but I've been reading about that and kind of realizing that makes a really good Russia analog. And yeah, there's just tons of stuff you can do with it. If you want, the Sea of Fallen Stars is like a Mediterranean Ocean analog, so there's so much stuff you can do. It's great. So many different stories that you can tell if you just go outside the area that tends to get focused on.
So I've been having a couple people. I made a video recently that was here's 8 plot hooks that you can just use in the Forgotten Realms. And that video came about from you guys exploring various sections of just the Sword Coast. And then it was like, oh, you want to go to Candlekeep? I like read a bunch about Candlekeep, and I'm like, we could do this and this. And then, oh, you're going to go to Dragonspear Castle. Oh, there's like Rakshasa that runs a vampire group there. Like all of that stuff was just there. And I'm like, this is kind of fun to take, and I can do whatever I want with it. So that was what really inspired that video, is like, there's lots of little weird things throughout the realms that you could be like, no, if they wind up here, here's like an obvious problem that your players could fix that's going to take like 3 or 4 sessions, and then they could move on to the next place if they're in like a travel montage. I totally forgot my question, but I think it was something to do with, do you find that in like Narfell when you're reading and things, is like you said, it's a good analogy for this, but actually now, well, I'll let you answer that, and then I remembered my question. But go ahead.
I think some places are more clearly a real world cultural analogs than others. Some of them just seem like straight out of, your boy Ed's imagination. Or I should say, I'm sorry, they're real. Elminster told Ed Greenwood about them.
He came to Earth, and they had a conversation. Tea was served.
Yeah. It's nothing weird about that. So, and yeah, some of them just seem more like straight up, just interesting ideas. Like one of the reasons I think Fae has been so endured so much is because it's this idea that's like, it really is a really cool, pretty original idea. You take this this idea of like, hey, Mulhorland? I can never pronounce it right.
But
the Egypt analog. Yeah. The Egypt analog that's farther south. You're like, back in the day, they conquered a bunch of stuff because they're in like an ancient civilization, right? They conquer a bunch of stuff, and they have a society that's like, oh, priests are the most important. Arcane spellcasters are not important. They're no good. And then one of the sections of their empire is primarily lived in by arcane spellcasters, and those guys are like, oh, you're repressing us by not letting us practice magic. We want to do crazy stuff. And the Mulhorandi priests are just like, you're gonna summon demons or something, we can't let you. But the empire is in decline, so what becomes Thay breaks off from it. So you have these people who are ethnically basically Egyptian, and like the subjugated peoples who lived in that area prior, and they just make a whole different kind of society, that's
a godless society in a way.
Yeah,
like the gods still exist in Forgotten Realms, but they are like, well, the gods are oppressive because the priests were oppressive, so now we have the power and the tools to do it. And so taking your government, taking a lot of that into your own hands. And
it's a really cool sort of take on that, and you can understand it from the different perspectives. Although the Thayans, bad guys, portrayed as bad guys, they do lots of really bad stuff. Like, they probably shouldn't have been allowed to break off into their own nation and just do whatever they wanted with arcane magic, because they bad. But their story is a little more multifaceted and gives you some interesting narrative and perspective stuff that you can do with it. So that's really cool and pretty original. But yeah, the like I talk about Kalimshan a lot. That's basically an analog for Turkey. I think originally it was supposed to be an analog just generally for the Middle East.
Yeah.
But then when they made Zakhara, the Al-Qadim area, they introduced that as a supplemental setting. They were just like, oh, well, now Kalimshan, it doesn't have to just be an amalgam of the Middle East, so we can be more specific with it. And people were like, oh, so it should be like the old Ottoman Empire, it would basically just be Turkey. And that's really cool because you know, when stuff is based off of a real historical, or not based off, but inspired by a real historical thing, it's much easier to write stuff in it, campaign stuff in it, because you can look at stuff that happened in real history for like your political intrigue or inspirations for your NPCs. You just get to mix magic and mythology into it more, which makes it more fun.
100%. And that reminds me of when you ran a first edition game for us, basic D&D, or D&D basic, or I say for us, for me and McBoots 42 and a couple of other friends. And one of my favorite things was you would get so excited. You're like, okay, you guys go here. I researched actual foods from this area, and then you guys can have all of these interesting like camel meat things. And it was fun. Like, and that's the kind of research that you can do when it is inspired from a real life source, you know?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. No, that was my Brightlands campaign for the Greyhawk channel.
That's right. Yeah, it was Greyhawk. Yeah.
Yep.
So and what do you... Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I was researching Brightlands and I was like, oh, I could throw some Moroccan influence in here. So I researched Moroccan street food for it. And I made a lot of it and then a reference to like ancient Sumerian stuff. So a lot of the ruins in the desert were like based off of Sumerian and Babylonian stuff.
Now, a comment I'm getting a lot lately with Forgotten Realms YouTube is, what do you do when your players know more about the Forgotten Realms than you do as the DM? And I've never encountered this, I guess, because a lot of times I'll preface it saying, well, this is my game and we're going to do X, Y, and Z. But like, for example, Rod of Seven Parts is supposed to be, you know, current realms or whatever. And you guys went and found that Rakshasa in Dragonspear Castle. That's a whole adventure from like, you know, 1420. And that Rakshasa has been gone for like 70 years. But I decided to use it because I thought it was cool. But I don't know. I haven't had people pop up and be like, actually, he was missing from this and this and this. And I don't know. Like, have you experienced that, knowing like a lot about the realms? Or have you ran a lot of games in the realms? Or even your Greyhawk experience, I guess?
I mean, the Greyhawk thing I didn't have to worry about because much fewer people seem to know about the Greyhawk history. I think some of the audience of the show was just like, oh, you should like reference this or this. And I'd be like, oh, I don't know that because I just researched this specific part of Greyhawk for this campaign. But because I know less about Greyhawk in general than I do about the realms. But I have not run into a situation where I have a player who knows more about the realms than I do because I am a huge nerd about it. I mean, one of my first D&D books that I ever bought after the 3rd edition Player's Handbook was the 3rd edition Forgotten Realms guide. So like that book is falling apart. I've read the heck out of that. And so I haven't run into that, but I would say if you do run into it, your solution, very good in my mind, which is that, like it's your version of the realms.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of just like, oh, well, if this person has something that they're really interested in the realms, I would go to them as a DM and be like, so you know a lot about the realms. What are some of like the highlights of the realms to you? And then you as the DM can try to like work some of that stuff into the game or research it yourself. Like I was playing in a 2nd edition game and just frustrated by Thaco the whole time. But I was playing in that a couple of years ago with a bunch of Gen Xers, and their whole thing was like they played 2nd edition growing up and then they wanted to get back into the game now that like their family lives were slowing down, and they invited me to play in it. And I knew a lot more about the realms than the DM did, but he would be like, oh, we have downtime in the game. What do you want your character to do? And I'm like, oh, I want to go, because I think I had a flying carpet that I had found in a dragon horde at some point. Awesome. So I said like, oh, I want to go and like look for stuff. Or like go and journey in different parts of the realms. And he's like, oh, what parts of the realms? And I was like, oh, well, I like Kalimshan. I like the Anauroch Desert and some other different places. And I told that. And then when we came back from break, he was like, okay, while you were traveling in that desert, you found this treasure map. So he had looked up an adventure that had been set there that had to deal with the treasure map and gave me the treasure map. So he's like, yeah, so if you can convince the party, we can basically go and I can run this adventure for you.
That's cool.
In that location. And I thought that was really, really cool because it was a great way for the DM to be like, I don't necessarily know everything about this part of the realms, but if you point me in a direction, I will go and research it and then present you with something that is to your taste in this lore area. Right?
Yeah, and I think that also just comes back full circle to a session 0 where you say straight up, like, we're going to run a game here. What do you guys want to get out of this game? It's like, oh, I really want to go to Kalimshan. I really want to do this. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then you can kind of, I mean, if it is just a more open thing, you can run around and do that. And I love that idea. And I think that's another really cool thing about the realms is that you could be like, okay, I want to run something in the Anorok Desert, and then you start searching through older material, and you find this module 7B that was actually built for the Anorok Desert, and you can kind of just upscale that and run it. So that's really cool. I like it. You're writing. We've been talking about it on Errata 7 Parts. You're working on a zine. What's going on there? I'd like to hear more about this zine that I'm excited for.
Yeah, I'm making a zine. I guess, like, if there are future issues, then I guess the title of the zine becomes Dank Dungeons Presents, and then whatever the subtitle is that issue, I guess. But I don't know if there's going to be future issues. So the one I'm working on right now is called The Shifting City. And it is a system agnostic RPG setting guide / dungeon synth album.
Rock on.
Yeah. It's and it's basically about this the thing that I came up with myself, but I'm sure it's a derivative of something that I just don't know about. The idea that there's this city that is magically enchanted that shifts between planes of existence every week or so. And the idea is that it's populated by merchants because it'll like shift to a different plane of existence, and then people will wander into it and buy and sell stuff. And then the city will shift again, but the wares that have been bought and sold from that dimension are still there. So then when they go to a new dimension, they're like, hey, do you want to buy like a magical sword from another dimension? This is the only place you can buy it because this city's been there. So yeah, primarily populated by merchants. And then the two big power structures in the city are aristocrats, who I named the Panjandrum, which is like a funny term that I basically had a thesaurus open, and I was looking at
you're throwing darts at it, or
yeah, I was like other terms for aristocrat or oligarch, and I found that, and I was like, that sounds obscure and fun. So
it is fun, yeah.
And they're these rulers that are like merchants who have cornered a certain market, and because they have cornered that market and have enough wealth and prestige, they become the people who govern the city.
Right.
And there's just, like a couple dozen of them at any given time. And then whenever one of them falls out of grace in their market because, like, I don't know, people just become uninterested in that product, they lose enough money, and then they lose that social station, and whoever has more money moves up and becomes a new Panjandrum. And then the other power structure are thieves guilds, because it's a big city, trade is a focus, so thieves guilds. And there's like, the book says, there's like hundreds of them at any given time because they're always forming, big or small, so it's backstabbing each other, falling apart, and then reforming.
Yeah, you're just like, do you want to start a thieves guild? Yeah, just the two of us. Yeah, we'll get some more people out or something. And then like a week later, they've got hundreds of followers, and then it all falls apart because they don't have a structure for their thieves guild or something. That's fun.
Exactly that. Yes. So one of the things the book kind of is, and I try not to be too heavy-handed with it or preachy, but there's a lot of satire in it, which is just like, hey, did you know capitalism is bad? It produces bad people. There's lots of, everyone who rules the city is a product of how bad capitalism can be. But it's mostly, I wanted to do the OSR thing and have random tables for stuff. So for thieves guilds, it's like, there's hundreds at any given time. Instead of giving you a list of thieves guilds, here are several pages of random roll tables to generate your own thieves guilds.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of crazy stuff you can make. Like, you can make a thieves guild that are a bunch of like buskers who are like ghosts and have this crazy hideout that's like full of that's like a weird some sort of aquarium that has all sorts of weird underwater life in it, and they would have like a crazy name like the 13 ne'er-do-wells or something. And there's just all these charts that allow you to randomly generate pretty much the whole thing. Or, I mean, as I write in the text, you can just choose the ones you want. That's also fine. But so the same idea for the Panjandrum. There's a bunch of charts for generating them and the kind of market that they have control over and what their entourage is like. So their entourage can be like cephalopod diviners. So just like octopus people who can foretell the future are like the people that hang out with them. It's mentioned in chat. I came across this as well. Really funny. The other use of Panjandrum is a weird super weapon that was designed for World War II. It looks really silly. It's like a big wheel. It's like the other use of that word, and it's
the
hilarious.
Great Pandandrum. That's awesome. A rocket-propelled, explosive-laden cart designed by the British military. That's really funny and cool.
It's really silly. It was one of the things where I found that word as a synonym for oligarch, and I put it in the book, and then I later found out it was that, and I'm like, I don't know. I think this makes this word better. Now I want to use 100%. It more because how silly
look at this
that is.
Art.
It's so silly.
History's failed military weapons. Okay, I'm putting this in chat. No, I'm not, because I copied the wrong thing, but I will put it in chat. Just you wait.
So there's those generated in the book. There's short pieces of fiction in the book because I just like doing that. The idea that you can read like a page that's like a little short story, like a little vignette, and it's just set in the setting, so you have an idea of what the setting's like just from that, instead of me like explaining what the setting is like, you know. And there's random generators for magic items, rumors in the city, so different adventure hooks. Also creating your own Thieves Guild hideout or Panjandrum villa so that adventurers can adventure through those locations. And finally, there's a little adventure at the end where I just generated a Thieves Guild, a Panjandrum, and a Panjandrum villa, and then I made a heist adventure that's set in that location.
That's fun.
Yeah, it's cool. The only reason why it's not out yet, because I was going to put it out a couple weeks ago, is just because I'm still waiting on some dungeon art for the map for the adventure. But as soon as that gets to me, that book is basically done. So in the next couple weeks, I'm hoping.
Where are you releasing
and then there's I'm releasing it on Bandcamp because it is partially an album too. It has the whole synthwave album. You can actually check it out right now. Most of the tracks are up if you want to listen to what the album sounds like. And if you're familiar with Dungeon Synth, that's what it's like.
Cool.
Instrumental.
Give me the link and I'll put it in the show notes for the podcast and various other things so that people watching this later can check it out. But man, that's really cool. That's really awesome. I am also, half working on a campaign setting because I think that's the natural dungeon master thing to do at some point. Is you're just like, and we especially like the OSR, and and after playing Hot Springs Island, I love the idea of a system neutral campaign setting, and that I could be like, I want to play this with 5th edition D&D, but you know what? I could play this with Dungeon Crawl Classics, and it could be a very different game just because the mechanics are different and roll tables and stuff. And what I love about your Shifting Sands world is that because of the roll tables, which is just a fun OSR thing that I love, the shifting city could leave, and when it comes back, you re-roll, and you're like, oh yeah, those people that were in power, totally gone. Now it's like, it's all about, Big Al, and he runs everything, and da-da-da. And like Thieves Guilds change because you can just roll it and be like, yeah, there you go. So really
the market
fun.
is completely different now. After those 3 other plane hops they did, no one cares about like fire nectar anymore. Now it's all about this weird exotic fish that everyone needs to get their hands on.
Too funny. So I wanted to talk about DCC because we both love DCC. Sure. They're doing the Bride of Cyclops Con, I think it's what it's called. And it's an online thing. I talked about it before, but Dungeon Crawl Classics Goodman Games hosted a Cyclops Con, which was their online, just an online convention that I think they were testing the waters to make sure they could make DCC days online as opposed to in whatever. But you ended up running a fun game for that we co-wrote, which was kind of fun.
Yeah. We co-wrote games for both of their virtual conventions so far.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I forgot about the other one. That's awesome. So the first one was Purple Peril of the Purple Planet. That was kind of a campaign setting for Dungeon Crawl Classics. But it's, this terrible purple planet. And you liked it. And so we ran something there that we wrote, and that was fun. And then the other one was Umerica, which is the post-apocalyptic America setting. Like, I don't know, for Dungeon Crawl Classics. That's really fun.
Yeah, so it was the Purple Planet one was Sand Sailors of the Purple Planet, which was just people going across a desolate wasteland trying to find their way to a portal that can send them back to the worlds that they're from and escape the terrible alien world of the Purple Planet, which is, it's very like a John Carter of Mars kind of setting, except a little more brutal. And the Umerica thing was Welcome to Dinotastic Park, which is just a Jurassic Park reference. The whole thing was Jurassic Park reference.
But it's so much fun.
Oh, it was a ton of fun. It was really great to run. And it's funny because for that one, we had Celeste Konowich playing in it. And the whole time she was just like, I'm working on a Jurassic Park referencing thing right now, and I can't say anything about it. And
which
that just came out like last week, which is what, Dino World or something,
Dino
which
World.
is an Eberron setting, Jurassic Park reference D&D adventure you can find on DMsGuild. So that was super cool. I haven't read it yet. Maybe she stole out all of my ideas from the one
probably. Yeah. I mean, there's some royalty checks you should be getting in the mail soon. I don't know.
But those virtual cons are amazing.
Yeah.
They're really, really fun. And the stuff I've been running and that Jordan has been helping me write has been up on Dungeon Crawl Classic, Goodman Games Twitch channel and broadcast during the virtual cons. But the way the virtual cons work is like phenomenal, and one of those things that like other companies, specifically Wizards of the Coast, need to take note of. The way it works is there's a website for events. I think it's just called tabletop.events. I could be wrong, but the way it works in non-pandemic times is an event is posted and you buy your tickets through the site, and you can sign up for events that are happening at the event through the site. But the way Goodman Games has used it for virtual cons is you sign up for the virtual con through the site. You can also host virtual games, and you can sign up for the different games that people are hosting. So it's like there's a fee for sign up for the con, which is usually like $5 or something, and then to play in a game it ranges from free, which I think is if a random person is running one, right, or like $4 to like $8. So basically nothing. It's very little
kind
money.
of like Gen Con does that, where I think Gen Con wants all the tables to be free for people to just come and play, because you already bought a ticket to Gen Con, but you have to have a little bit of money behind a ticket in order for people to show up to their game and things like that, you know. So it's like, no, I did spend $4 on this, I want to go play the game. And I feel like Goodman Games is using that model, because you could do free, and I think Wizards of the Coast did a bunch of like free games, but the Adventure League DMs wouldn't show up, and like other things weren't happening, and so a lot of games weren't happening, and and so I don't know, it's just kind of interesting. So you buy a ticket for like $2 or something, and then I'm in Lex's game, and that's exciting. So
so it's really, it's set up really well. Everything seems to work pretty well. Like the last two cons I was in, 2 or 3 games each con, like premium events that Goodman Games DMs were hosting. And it was great because it would be like Brendan LaSalle, who writes a bunch of adventures for them and like made the X-Crawl setting that they have, was like running X-Crawl games, and I could just sign up and be in them. And I'm like, cool, I get to play in an X-Crawl game written by the dude who wrote X-Crawl. That's awesome. And lots of fun. The only problems that we ran into was just like some Zoom technical glitch things, which, considering like Goodman Games are very new to technology, it seems like, I totally understand that they might have some issues, and other players, just because it's like random people who have bought tickets are playing, and then we have to make sure like their tech setup is okay. Like, so
do you have a microphone that works? Oh, you didn't test your microphone. Okay. And like, is your internet fast enough for this? Oh, it's not, because someone upstairs is watching Netflix and you have very limited bandwidth. Then
so here's a thing from chat that reminded me, because I haven't actually looked into it. The D&D celebration thing, I know there's a bunch of panels, right? Because I've read about a bunch of those and people who are going to be on them, and I'm interested to watch them. But are there virtual games that you can join?
I believe so, yeah. And I think it's, I think they learned from their last time doing this that they're going to have all the money's going to charity from what I understand. So even the $5 ticket sale and things like that, but that gets you into the con and I think that $5 allows you to register for a certain amount of games is really what it is, because I don't have to buy that ticket to watch D&D's stream of all their panels. So I think that's what the ticket does, but I don't know. I should know this because we're a Saturday morning D&D talk show, but I don't. So I'll have more information next week. How about that?
Yeah, we were talking about like new news, and I was just like, I don't think anything's happened. There was the D&D celebration thing, and I just totally forgot that was happening.
Well, so PAX is gonna do a 2-week long thing, I think, or maybe it's 10 days. But basically PAX Online, because everyone's doing online cons now, PAX Online and the D&D celebration are happening or closing on the same weekend. So like PAX is 10 days and then D&D celebration is like the last 3 days. And I wonder if they're doing something together, if there's going to be a lot of Tasha announcement, or if just like new announcements, because specifically Zendikar and things like that, they did a bunch of Magic the Gathering announcements, and they're going to have that Forgotten Realms Magic the Gathering setting, which is interesting to me. I'm not a Magic the Gathering like super guy, and I don't know. So, but I thought that was kind of funny that they're like, no, we're gonna do like, I don't know, you can play Guinevere and Drist, and you have cards that play these Planewalkers or something. But that announcement for Q3 of 2021 made me think that we're going to get an announcement of, by the way, we're getting a Zendikar book for 5th edition D&D, because Zendikar is really popular. And why, if you're going to cross promote, why not have something that gets the D&D people into Magic and the Magic people back into D&D, so that they can become friends at the game store and hang out, and it's going to be good.
Yeah, we were having this discussion with Ted after Rod of Seven Parts this past week. Also, hey, after our Rod of Seven Parts games, we have some spicy, hot discussions about the industry.
I want to record them and put them on the Patreon, but I don't think I want that at the same thing, because we have very strong opinions about things.
we have very strong opinions, and we're not always nice about stuff. But they're fun. But we have fun. We have fun. So we're talking about this, and I was making the point of like, hey, I understand that they want to cross promote their stuff, but like, I don't know what sales were like for Ravnica or Theros, but I assume, judging by like how much I hear about them in use, specifically Ravnica, that sales were okay, but significantly less than most other D&D products, right? So I don't understand why they keep doing crossovers with Magic sets, because I don't like, it seems like a less lucrative thing to do. And you had brought up that you had some friends who, when Ravnica came out, they were like Magic the Gathering players, and they had come to you and said, oh, there's a Magic the Gathering D&D thing, we want you to run that, right? And then you had been like, no, I don't know anything about Ravnica, so I'm not gonna.
And I don't, and that's what it was. Like they really wanted to play D&D, but they wanted to play in Ravnica. And I'm sure that had I the time, I probably could have talked to them and convinced them to play in a non-Ravnica game. But I was like, I don't have time for another game at this point. I was running like 3 or 4 a week, and that was just a lot back in the day. Pre-baby days. Now I'm good with my 2 games, and that's all I'm getting in. But they wanted to play in a Ravnica game so bad because they knew all of the lore. And so then I was trying to convince them, like, you should just buy that book and run a Ravnica game. Like, buy the player's handbook and buy Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, and that's all you really need. You're probably sold. Like,
oh yeah.
And he was like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, I think D&D is a lot simpler than Magic the Gathering rules, but I could be wrong. Like, you can do this.
I mean, it's definitely simpler than Magic the Gathering rules, like prior to 2008, because they did do like a rule overhaul at one point and removed like a lot of the stuff with the stack and spell burn and things, which is too bad, or not spell burn, mana burn, which is too bad because Mana Burn was cool. But the and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to hate on Ravnica in any way when I say that I don't think it sold well. Like, I think that might be the best written 5e book that has been produced. Like, I love that book.
Yeah.
And I really want to use it more, but I feel like I don't see it a lot in use, and I don't know if it successfully is bringing in people from Magic the Gathering.
Right.
And so that's why I'm always like confused when they're like, we're doing another Magic the Gathering crossover book. And I'm like, guys, how is this how is this working for you?
Yeah.
We have a note in chat that it's more cost effective to make Magic the Gathering crossover books because they already own a bunch of art that they can slap in the book. Don't need to commission new art.
Yeah. And the art is always fantastic too.
It's so good.
These books come out and you're like, wow. Like, I mean, Theros had... Like, they had all the Nyx gods and stuff from the dream world, and you're like, this looks awesome. And most 9 times out of 10, I feel like people pick up RPG stuff because the art resonates with them for a little bit. And we talked about the alternate Theros cover. It just is so cool. The shiny foil one with like the Hydra attacking and stuff, and you're just this looks amazing. And you're right. Like it when it's in-house like that, they're like, we own the property, we own all the art. We literally just have to hire like 2 or 3 writers who are probably big into Magic the Gathering lore anyway, and they could like write a quick book and then throw some art on there and we'll go. So I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I know that you would save a lot of money on art because I know how much it costs to commission art, since I sometimes publish things that have commissioned art for them. And it definitely can be quite a bit of money, but it's still, there's a lot of other like layout and writing costs are probably more than your costs of art with a book, at least of that size anyway. Like, if it's a short document, it might be art that's more, but yeah. So I assume that like they're definitely saving money, but are they saving that much money? And yeah, it's I don't know. What did Ted was also saying something about how what he would like to see is Wizards do more like licensed properties, because it would be like more guaranteed like sales, right?
Yeah.
But instead, all of these different licensed properties are doing D&D stuff, but they're just doing it on their own. Like,
they're trying to make their own system, like Game of Thrones. Like, okay, we have Game of Thrones, and we don't do Game of Thrones in D&D 5e. Instead, we're gonna like create our own Game of Thrones RPG system, and it's like, you would sell so much more if it was just this is how you can use the system that is popular and you are familiar with a Game of Thrones like setting over it or something. Bad example because everyone hates Game of Thrones after the season finale, but
I mean,
the series
it is
finale.
bad now. But The Witcher is like that too. Conan the Barbarian is like that now. And Call of Cthulhu was kind of like always like that, right? So that, I think that's true, but it's interesting because like that is what TSR did in the 80s, is they just aggressively pursued licensing and then published stuff. So Star Wars, I'm pretty sure they made a Star Wars game. Now, it's not that they made a D&D Star Wars, it's that TSR made a role-playing game that was Star Wars. And they made Indiana Jones, which was kind of notorious, right, for not being very good, and a bunch of others that were all licensed. And yeah, it's just interesting that Wizards of the Coast is not pursuing that, and instead, because there's still a hunger for it, these companies are just doing it themselves. And I feel like Wizards is losing out on a lot of money. Now, on the one hand, I understand that the D&D creative team is very small, so they don't have a lot of staff to do stuff like this. But with the potential for money you're going to make off of this product, because at this point we have enough case studies that like, yes, people want RPG tie-in products for all these franchises because they're selling pretty well. They could probably be like, oh, okay, we're going to probably make X amount of dollars, so we can hire a writing team to do this. I think it's odd to me that they haven't.
That Wendy's RPG, that Critical Role fiasco a while ago, that just proves that point. Like, if Wendy's can create an RPG and it's like, people are like, oh, this is interesting. And I can't tell you how many tweets I saw that night that went live where they were just like, I think I'm going to go get some Wendy's. And they like would drive and go, and Wendy's sales were up because of that. And I don't know anybody playing that right now, but I don't know. It's interesting. Like, yeah. And Wizards of the Coast has been really tying into Stranger Things pretty well. With
That's true. They did do licensed Stranger Things stuff.
They
Yep.
did do licensed Stranger Things stuff to the point now where we're getting those comics that are coming out at the end of the year that are not the Stranger Thing boys, but they're D&D characters running through a fantasy world. So it's like the fantasy characters. That's the comic. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So it's not like them in Hawkins. It's them in their crazy world going to fight the Demogorgon and stuff like that. So I don't know, but I feel like of all Lucian, if you've been on Lucian is a huge Stranger Things fan, and he thinks it's awesome that D&D is doing all this stuff with Stranger Things. I like Stranger Things, but I don't think I don't think Stranger Things is pulling as many people into D&D as we think it is. I could be wrong, to the point where how well did that tie-in do? And I played in that D&D supplement that they made. And it was not that much fun. It was kind of poorly written, but the idea is that it was supposed to be written by this 10-year-old, and it showed that it was written by a 10-year-old. And it was very unbalanced, and it was kind of like, I don't know how this was supposed to work, but like, is it, aside from collectors, are people actually buying this to like start playing D&D? I don't know. So.
Well, it's also one of those things that Stranger Things is a big deal when it's in season. It's not like a big movie franchise like a Star Wars or an Indiana Jones. Because like Indiana Jones, obviously movies aren't currently coming out for that. Hopefully. Harrison Ford's too old, you guys. Just stop making him. But you could still do put out a new role-playing game based on that, and it would probably do really well.
Well, what about Avengers? Like, why aren't we doing...
Sure, yeah.
Like,
Marvel,
why isn't Wizards of the Coast
RPG
saying, hey, Marvel, we want to partner with you to make an Avengers RPG where people can create their own superheroes? And
And doesn't Hasbro make all the Marvel toys and own Wizards of the Coast? So, like,
probably,
why aren't we seeing that? And it's not like they haven't taken cracks at Marvel RPGs before. Some of them have been really bad, but they've always tried it, and they've always sold because people like those properties. So I think Stranger Things is just kind of a bad example because it's a TV show on Netflix. It's not as big of a deal as a movie franchise or some of the other things you could license, right? But yeah, I think they should do more licensed stuff because somebody's going to do it anyway, right?
Yeah.
So the Wizards of the Coast might as well try to be the ones who are doing it, because at least I trust their design team a little better than I trust whatever design team Wendy's is hiring.
Exactly. Right? Speaking of licensed worlds, Fritz Leiber in D&D Lankmar. You are familiar with the Lankmar books and the Lankmar setting, I assume. This has been out for a while. So Dungeon Crawl Classics, that's kind of their new business model is, they're like, it's been 10 years, like 11 years. I think DCC came out in 2011 or 12. And they haven't done a lot of bloat, like extra classes and things like that with the book. It's very just like still core DCC. But they are licensing other estates to say, hey, Lankmar, we want to do a Dungeon Crawl Classics Lankmar edition, and we want to do a Dungeon Crawl Classics Empire of the East edition and things like that, based on these older Appendix N books that are really, from the 70s and stuff. Have you played a Lankmar game? Is this something that you're itching to do? You've read the system, I assume, or...
Yeah, no, I've read parts of the box set, and I really want to play in one, and I'm gonna try and run one for Bride of Cyclops Con.
Okay.
I'm like very familiar with the stories. The Fafford and Grey Mouser are like the two main characters from that. And they're a part of Appendix N that I feel like a lot of people don't know as much about. Like, people know a lot about Tolkien, they know a lot about Conan. But it feels like they don't know as much about Fafford.
And I didn't when this came out. I was really curious, and I'm reading one of the Fafford and Grey Mouser books right now, and they're a lot of fun. It's really interesting.
Yeah, they're tons of fun.
And I just got done reading the Dying Earth, or a bunch of the Dying Earth books, which is another inspiration from D&D back in the day. And
Fancy and Magic.
That's
where it's
Jack
from.
Vance. And he's... and in 2021, I think Goodman Games is going to launch a Kickstarter for the Dying Earth campaign setting for Dungeon Crawl Classics, which I'm really excited for. So
So Goodman Games are super smart. I give them a lot of credit because they understand. For one thing, they don't like you were saying earlier. They don't do rules bloat stuff. So they have their main core rule books, and then whenever they're going to publish something new, it's like an adventure or a setting book. It's never like classes or class options, because they know that that's not really what their audience are interested in. And they also get these licenses that are very niche licenses, but again, it's the kind of thing where they're already in a niche area where they know their audience are people who probably are more familiar with the dustier corners of the Appendix N authors, right? So like their audience is going to know who Fritz Leiber is, their audience is going to know who Jack Vance is, and probably have read some of their stuff. So getting those licenses is a really key thing for them. Plus those licenses, I mean, I'm sure they're not free, but it's not like getting the license for Indiana Jones, right?
Yes.
It's probably much more doable for a small company.
Yeah, 100%.
And then they put their own DCC spin and like art style and aesthetic onto those properties, and it usually works out really well. It just feels very well curated. Like everything they do feels very well thought out and well planned.
And specifically with Lankmar, that is a setting that has... you're talking about like well planned and well thought out. Like that is a setting that doesn't have gods and priests and clerics and things. So when you play DCC Lankmar, you are a warrior or a thief or a wizard. And like those are the classes that you can play. So they actually took classes away, and you're not a dwarf, you're not an elf, you're not all this other stuff. But they introduced a new system for healing and a new, like a thing called fleeting luck that kind of like makes you heroes, as opposed to feeling like you are, like original DCC, you're just a peasant that found a magic wand kind of a feeling. But in Lankmar, you're supposed to be a hero, and I like that. So, I don't know. So I'm really excited for that kind of stuff. There were a couple of other interesting things you wanted to talk about with our 9 minutes left. We didn't get to everything, but which I knew we wouldn't. But specifically, like the Kickstarter and Wizard Seeking Wizard, if you want to like.
Oh, well, we can skip Wizard Seeking Wizard. I'll just say that it's a podcast I just discovered, and it's like a joke podcast about like a wizard dating podcast. They have like segments of different people who are supposedly like they have it's scripted, right? That they're like different kinds of wizards that are looking for dates on this podcast. It's very funny, but yeah, worth checking out. But the Kickstarter is there's an Old School Essentials Kickstarter going on right now.
They didn't promote this stream or anything. We just are big fans of the OSR. So
yeah, like when I ran the Brightlands Greyhawk thing, I used the Old School Essentials rules, which is a rewrite of the D&D BX set rules from 1980 or 1981. And Old School Essentials is great because it takes all those rules and rewrites them very concisely. Like the layout of that book, of those books, are just like chef's kiss. They're so good. They're so easy to read and easy to use, and they're great. And the company that does it, Necrotic Gnome Press, are doing advanced fantasy. They actually already have a couple of those books out, but they're like doing kind of different variations on them. And the advanced fantasy is they took first edition AD&D rules, which had come out alongside BX, like at the time it launched, because the way D&D worked in the early 80s was there was Dungeons and Dragons, and then there was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So if you're just getting into the game, you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is the simpler rule set, and then Advanced was the thing with the more class options. So like in regular, you could be like a warrior, a wizard, a thief, a cleric, an elf, a halfling, or a dwarf, and like that was it, because it had race as class. And then Advanced D&D was like, I think in second edition they decouple race from class. They might do it a little bit in first edition, but that was the thing that had like acrobat and barbarian and bard and stuff like that. So like further class options that were more complex and more complex rules. And the advanced fantasy thing from Necrotic Gnome is they take all the content from AD&D and then convert it to BX. So it mathematically works with BX, but you get all those class options within that system. And it's cool. I've read through a bunch of it. You can be an illusionist. You can be a gnome illusionist. It's great. Real sweet old school D&D stuff. And yeah, there's like 5 days left on the Kickstarter. They had originally been asking like $20,000. They're at $230,000
Yeah,
right
it's
now.
really cool.
So don't worry about them not meeting their goal. They but they they have and what's his name? Peter Mullen, I think, is the name of the artist who they have doing all their covers, and his art is just so cool.
It's
like
very
super
retro, like it feels like those old school books and stuff, which is one of the reasons I was drawn to Dungeon World Classics to begin with, because I'm like, what is this art? Like, this is amazing. And then I started picking up old AD&D stuff, and you're like, oh, okay, like we're mimicking this. And yeah, this artist is really cool with a lot of really awesome stuff. Why other than it's just fun, why is it important to play some of these older things? Like,
oh my gosh, Jordan, I'm so glad you asked that question. That could be, we should have chosen that as our topic for the episode.
Maybe
we could have talked about
I'll
that
fire Lucian and you'll come back next week and we'll talk about it.
No, don't do that. But I would love to tackle that in some form.
Maybe we could do a video on the YouTubes and just me and you just chat about that or like a live stream sometime. So,
and I mean, we could definitely bring in other people for that. That would be cool.
A round table would just be like,
yeah, the idea of like, okay, 5th edition is great. You should play it. It's really good. But it's not the only game out there, everyone. It's important not only to experience other RPGs, but also to experience past editions of D&D, because, like, sure, there's a lot of bad stuff in past editions of D&D. I already talked about how much I hate THAC0. I really hate THAC0. I hate it so much. But there's really, really, really cool design choices in past editions. Some of which, I mean, when they wrote 5th edition, you can tell if you've read older editions that they went back and looked at those older editions and took inspiration from them in a lot of the design choices for 5th. So it's just like, you're going to have a way better understanding of the game. And if you like to homebrew stuff, you're going to have a way better understanding of mechanics and how they evolve and what works and what doesn't, right? And sort of also from an anthropological perspective, how different generations have viewed RPGs and kind of like what mechanics worked at certain times and like why people viewed gameplay the way that they did and why games played differently. Like D&D 1st edition plays very differently than current editions of D&D does. And there's and I think like when people online now talk about like grognards and people who played way back in the day and how they don't like their play style, it's because they're trying to compare it to the way they play 5th edition. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. There was a very good reason for them to play the way they did back in the day, because the rules supported that kind of gameplay.
Dungeon crawling specifically and going through like, and exploring that way, as opposed to let's have a conversation for an hour and a half about, what we're going to do with this 5th rod fragment that we just found. Like the role play aspect and the storytelling aspect is a lot more robust now, as opposed to earlier versions where it was just kind of like, hey, let's go explore a dungeon. So
yeah, it was, people boil it down to, it was more about killing monsters and taking their stuff in past editions. And I think that's not necessarily true. I think there's much more nuance to the argument than that, but it definitely did work a very different way. Which, like, yeah, we don't have time to get into all of that, but there's a lot about that that's very interesting. So you can learn a lot about the game by looking at and playing older editions, just trying them out, and by playing other RPGs and seeing how they handle different aspects of gameplay. Like, one of the easiest ones to get into are the Apocalypse World engine games, because they're like very simplistic at their core. But like, I'm going to be playing Monster of the Week some point soon with my private group. And it's like, does a lot of really cool stuff with narrative and with action in the Apocalypse World engine. And there's cool stuff in there. You talk about Kids on Bikes a lot.
I love Kids on Bikes.
Yeah, that game does a lot of cool stuff. Tales from the Loop does a lot of really cool stuff. What else? Like they're really
Cypher
cool
System,
mechanics.
And it was interesting playing Cypher System where specifically I was playing Numenera, but where the same roll to hit a monster has just as much urgency as you trying to like swing over a river or because it is literally just you're rolling a d20 for everything. And the fluid transition from narrative to combat was awesome and fun. Before we go, I wanted to talk about the one thing that when we played your Brightlands campaign, specifically like OSR or old school D&D compared to current D&D, you talk about the differences. Initiative was so funny in that game because I think it was every round.
Initiative works in BX, yeah.
Every round we would roll a d6, and the enemy collectively would roll a d6, and so our collective d6 was higher than theirs, and so there was no modifiers to this. Like it was just luck. And then when it was like, okay, you gonna go first. Is anybody
first, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so then it was like, okay, is anybody doing ranged attacks? Because those happen before melee. And so it's not like, well, Jordan rolled a 12 and Lex rolled a 6, so Jordan's going first and then Lex goes. It was just all of us like, well, I'd like to cast a spell. Okay, well, you're gonna go after this, and I'd like to. And I thought that was really. It was so different from how I have experienced D&D in now. So it was interesting.
It's it's an initiative system that I wish I could port over to 5e, but you kind of can't because of the way spells and attacks work in 5e. The whole idea of 5e is like a spell should be cast by a 3rd level wizard should be just as powerful as an attack from a 3rd level fighter in combat, right? You should be able to have just as much impact on combat, but the way initiative assumes things work in that is spellcasters have to go last because those spells are going to be devastating, so they're going to have to wait. And if you tried to enforce a system like that in 5e, it's just like, oh, I just have to wait to do the same thing everyone else is doing, which is not as much fun. It just kind of hurts the players.
Yeah.
But the idea of rolling team initiative, I think, is really interesting. There's even rules in that book for like if your team's d6, if the player's d6 is the same number as the monster's d6, they just act at the same time.
Yeah.
So like melee attacks just go off at the same time for both sides.
So you could potentially have we both killed each other because my attack definitely goes off and your attack definitely goes off. And
both hit.
And we both hit and we both took us to 0. And you don't see that in D&D. 5e, I guess, because it's always going to be like, well, my attack literally went before yours, so you didn't get the chance to attack. And yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a super fun initiative system that's worth trying out if you're playing one of those older games.
Yeah. Well, Lex, thank you so much for coming on short notice again. And this has been a really good discussion. We need to have more just chats about the OSR because I love it. And I agree with LB in chat that we need to play some more Dungeon Crawl Classics.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, so much fun. Just like one-shots and stuff. Thank you guys so much for coming out and watching us live. Thank you for liking the show and maybe leaving reviews for the podcast and things like that. I know I said Ryman Frost Maidens. We were going to talk about Frost Maidens with Lucian, but then he didn't show up. So now we ended up talking about the OSR because that's what we love. You guys are great. We will see you next week with another episode of the Saturday Morning D&D Show. Lex, anything you would like to say or promote or whatever before we leave?
I'm just gonna reiterate the zine that I'm working on. Check that out. I can actually post the link in chat if you'd like.
Yeah, I don't know if you are an administrator, ad moderator. So now you should be able to.
Okay, I was gonna say I sent it to you in Discord, but I'll post it here. So yeah, check that out. It's gonna be on Bandcamp and Itch in the next few weeks. Depends how quickly I can get that dungeon art, but yeah, in the next few weeks. So check it out if you're interested in that.
Yeah, please do, and I'll put that in the show notes for the podcast and things like that. And it's going to be awesome. Also, your Twitter is literally above your head on the overlay, so go subscribe to Lex on Twitter because I'm sure he will be promoting a lot of his stuff there, and you can find it. And yeah, with that, everybody, we'll see you next week with another episode of the Saturday Morning D&D Show. Goodbye.
Bye.